Hello, and welcome to the Paraeducator course. This is the second of 3 in a video series that are designed to cover Standard 4, addressing emotional and behavioral concerns. Once again, I'd like to introduce myself and my co-presenter. My name is Britt, and I have worked for Keystone in a variety of roles, including school social worker, for the past 17 years. My co-presenter is Dee Blanchard. Dee is the Learning Supports Consultant for Keystone and has been employed at Keystone for the past 16 years. As a reminder, we are your presenters for all 3 videos that encompass Standard 4, Emotional, and Behavioral. Standard 4 contains 7 different competencies. Each competency is addressed during the video series. With each competency, there are 3 to 6 objectives. This video series, video 2, will cover competencies 3 and 4. Standard 4 states the following. Under the supervision of a licensed educational professional, the paraeducator will recognize that there is a cause or reason for misbehavior and assist in determining the cause or reason. Competency 3 of Standard 4 states the following: to document and report objective observations on student behaviors. There are 5 learning objectives for Competency 3. The first learning objective is to learn the basic foundations of student observation, collecting data, and recording data with a focus on accuracy and fidelity. Objective 2, to learn the various types of recording data: frequency, duration, interval, latency, checklist, anecdotal. Objective 3, to increase knowledge through skills practice. Objective 4, to learn the type of data to collect. And Objective 5, to understand the connection of using data in instructional decision-making. As we begin to talk about observing student behavior and the different ways in which we can structure observations, it's important to review some of the ideas that were discussed in video 1. In order for everyone to have the same understanding of the behavior, an important step is to define the behavior. If we don't define the behavior clearly and concisely, everyone may have a different understanding of what is going on. This is called operationally defining the behavior. There are 4 components to consider when operationally defining behavior. They are observable. The behavior is an action that can be seen. The definition has to be measurable. The behavior can be counted or timed. The definition must pass the stranger test. It must be defined so clearly that someone new to the situation can recognize the behavior. And the definition must also name it to describe what the behavior looks and sounds like. You may include non-examples if it helps. So for example, the operational definition of on-task behavior is: Jenny sits quietly during classroom discussions without raising her hand or adding comments for the group. The next 2 examples include non-examples. The operational definition of disruption is: John makes noises with his mouth, limbs, or utensils during silent seat work. Disruption is not speaking after being called on. And an operational definition of aggression: Jada strikes other children with her hands. Aggression is not touching others with soft pats or brushing motions. You may remember one of the journal activities for video 1 was to write operational definitions of behavior. The activity was designed to encourage you to think about behavior in a more descriptive manner. It is better than only describing behavior as good or bad. Now that we've reviewed the what of behavior, we are going to turn our focus to why describing behavior in this manner is important. Here are 3 reasons why it is important to operationally define behavior. To ensure that accurate and meaningful data are gathered with subjectivity minimized or eliminated. We want to make the definition as concrete as possible. The second reason, to eliminate vague or imprecise definitions of the behavior. And lastly, to ensure that everyone is on the same page regarding the behavior targeted for change. We will now move on to how we measure behavior. Measuring behavior provides important data that allows a team to determine whether or not behavior is improving or getting worse. There are 6 common ways to measure behavior. We use the acronym FLTAD to remember these 6 different ways. Each letter stands for a different method of measuring behavior. They are frequency, latency, intensity, topography, accuracy, and duration. We will discuss each different measurement method and how to determine which method to use. Selecting the right measurement method is important. It's important to have a good understanding of the different ways to measure behavior so you can choose the method that gives you the data you need. The first method of measuring behavior is frequency. Frequency can be defined as how many times a behavior occurs or how frequently it happens. Frequency is measured by counting the behavior. Frequency is a good way to measure behavior that can be easily counted. For example, how many times a student blurts out or raises their hand are examples of behavior that can be measured with frequency. Behaviors measured in this way must have a very clear starting and stopping point. Other examples of behavior that can be measured with frequency include how many times a student is out of their seat or how many times they are late to class. The next measurement method is latency. Latency is measured in time. It is the amount of time it takes a student to begin a task after the direction is given. We all know those students for whom it seems to take forever to get something done. Latency is a good way to measure how long it takes. One example of behavior that can be measured with latency is starting independent work. Recording the amount of time from when a teacher gives an assignment to when a student has their materials out and starts their assignment can provide valuable data to the teacher and parents. Another example of using latency as a measure is the amount of time it takes for a student to transition to a new activity. The time from when the student asks students to put away materials no longer needed and get out new materials can be recorded. You can also use latency measured to compare one student to another. We call this peer comparison. 2 students can be timed completing the same tasks. For example, how long it takes to get started on their assignment. This type of measurement shows how much longer the student takes when compared to other students in their class. This can be, again, valuable data to share with the parents and the teacher so that the parents have an understanding or an idea of how much longer their student takes when compared with other students the same age. The third way to measure behavior is by intensity. Intensity is defined as the magnitude of the behavior, or how big it is. While there is not a concrete way to measure behavior in this way, we can use a scale that identifies low, medium, high, and extreme intensity. Please refer to the accompanying handout called Intensity of Behavior Chart. This provides examples that I will mention here, as well as some other examples of the varying levels of intensity. Examples of low intensity behavior may include blurting out, head down on desk, fidgeting that is not disruptive. Examples of medium intensity behavior include swearing or yelling, throwing an item off a desk, leaving the work area but staying in the room. Examples of high intensity behavior can include pushing another student, property destruction, like ripping up a workbook, breaking a pencil, or throwing a book, or leaving the classroom. Examples of extreme intensity behavior includes aggression that causes physical injury to others or self, throwing furniture, ripping secured items off the wall, like a whiteboard or a pencil sharpener, or leaving the school building. Again, please refer to the intensity of behavior chart provided in accompanying handouts for additional examples. The fourth way to measure behavior is topography. Topography is a fancy word for describing what the behavior looks like. We use an operational definition, as discussed earlier, and use clear, concise, and objective terms to describe the behavior. As an example, a tantrum may be described as a student kicking the floor, screaming loudly, and ripping papers up. Refusal may be described as sitting with the arms crossed, not making eye contact, and having their head down on a desk. The last two ways to measure behavior are accuracy and duration. Accuracy means how well or how accurate a task was done. A behavioral example is how well a student was able to follow the steps of social skills. If greeting someone, did they make eye contact, use appropriate volume, use a greeting, and ask how the other person is doing? Or did they forget one or more of the steps? Keeping track of how many steps they followed gives you data on how accurate the student was. Another behavior that can be measured using accuracy is following directions. Was the student able to follow all three directions when given a task? Or did they forget one or more of the directions? Additionally, how accurate a student is with these sorts of tasks can provide ideas when designing interventions to increase a student's accuracy. The last way to measure behavior is duration. Duration is how long a behavior lasts. Similar to latency, it is measured by time. You would use duration to measure the following behaviors: sleeping in class, how long a student uses the bathroom, or how long they work on a class assignment. Each way to measure behavior has its strengths and weaknesses, and not every measurement works for every behavior. The next step is to determine which measurement to use. Ask yourself, what do I want to know about the behavior? If you want to know how often the behavior occurs, then you would choose to measure using frequency. If you want to know how long a behavior lasts, you would choose duration as a way to measure. Once you have determined which measurement method to use, make sure that you are using an operationalized definition of behavior. For example, if you are going to count how many times a student gets out of their seat during work time, you want to make sure the operationalized definition includes all out-of-seat occurrences you want included. Sharpening a pencil, wandering around the room, and talking with a peer may all be included in the out-of-seat definition. However, getting up to ask the teacher a question may or may not be included in your operational definition. The last step is determine which data gathering tool works best for what you are trying to measure. When you are preparing to observe a student, it is helpful to have all of your materials gathered ahead of time. Next is a journal activity to get you thinking about determining which measurement method best fits for the behaviors described on this slide. Using FLITAD, and as a reminder, that stands for frequency, latency, intensity, topography, accuracy, and duration, determine which measurement method best fits for the behavior described. Record your answers on the Video 2 journal activity form. So far, we've reviewed the what in defining behavior, and we've discussed how to measure behavior. Now we're going to talk about why we measure behavior and collect data on behavior. Data is collected to provide concrete information regarding a student's behavior. It provides factual information regarding the scope of the behavior instead of the observer's opinion about the behavior. And data collection then leads to data analysis, which helps teams determine what changes to make to improve behavior. Additionally, data collection provides valuable information for developing an intervention to improve behavior. Data collection also provides valuable information for determining if an intervention is working or not. And data can be graphed so that it is more easily understood. So how do you go about determining which data collection method to use? Well, the measurement of the behavior you choose will determine which data collection method you use. So you want to figure out how you measure behavior, and then you can determine the data collection method as a result of that. For example, if you choose to measure frequency, the data collection method will be different than if you choose to measure duration. Next, we will be discussing 7 different types of data collection methods. They are event recording, latency recording, permanent product, anecdotal notes, interval recording, which includes whole, partial, and time sampling recording, duration recording, and ABC recording. The first method of data collection that we will discuss is called event recording. With event recording, each time a behavior occurs, it is recorded. Tally marks are a common way of documenting an event. Examples that can be measured using event recording include blurting out, raising a hand, or redirecting a student. Event recording is the best method when looking at frequency of a behavior. Some of the pros to event recording include patterns of behavior can be easily seen. It can be recorded with a paper and pencil and a very simple form. No additional technology is needed. Event recording is also known as a scatter plot or frequency chart. A con of event recording is it can be tough to keep track of every behavior if the behavior occurs frequently. And as mentioned before, event recording data collection is best for the frequency unit of measurement. I have a couple of examples of what event recording can look like. So this example you can see is just on a regular notebook piece of paper. There are columns that designate the days of the week, and there are rows that designate the different activities and the time of the activities during the day. So looking to see if there are any patterns in this behavior, you can see that the behavior occurs more frequently during the morning times than in the afternoon times. And you could add up the different tally marks to get an idea of how much more frequently the behavior is occurring in the morning or the afternoon. But just at a quick glance, you can see that there are some patterns to that behavior. Here is another example of event recording, and you can see at the top it is titled Functional Assessment Scatter Plot. So the columns are the days of the week and the rows indicate the time of the day. Again, you can see that there are many check marks during certain times of the day, more so than others. The one thing that I would say about this example is the time frames in the rows are not the same. Oftentimes, in order to compare the different cells or the different boxes of tally marks, it is helpful to have the time period the same so that you are comparing the same, you're comparing apples to apples instead of having different time periods. There are a couple of examples of scatter plots or frequency charts that are associated, that can be found in the accompanying handouts. I would encourage you, if you at any time would like to gather frequency data, to download a frequency chart and practice taking data in this manner. The second data collection method is latency recording. As we discussed earlier, latency recording is recording how much time passes from the time a direction is given to the start of a behavior. It provides useful information when the concern is work refusal or for those students who are always the last ones to get done or to be ready to go. And obviously, collecting data with a latency recording works best when you are using a latency unit of measurement. The pros of latency recording include: it provides helpful information when the concern or the behavior can be timed. It can be compared to peers with this method. You can record the amount of time it takes for your student compared to another student in the class, and to see if there is a big difference or not. Examples of behavior for using latency recording include getting materials out for class or getting ready for recess. Some cons to latency recording is it does require the ability to time. So you need to have a stopwatch, which would be an additional material or tool, as well as it does require a high level of attention to detail. You really have to be focused in on what it is that you're recording and be diligent to make sure you're starting and stopping the stopwatch when you need to. And as we said, it's best when used with the latency unit of measurement. So here is an example of what latency recording can look like. You can make a chart where you have the different directions that have been given, getting out your materials or getting ready to line up for recess. The second column is the amount of time in seconds that it takes for the student to comply or to follow that direction. And you can see in the third column, that is the peer comparison. So it would be how many seconds after the last peer finished that direction did the student you're observing follow. So you can see for both of these examples, there's quite a bit of difference between the student you're observing and a peer comparison. That can be very valuable information to the parents, to the teacher, And if you have AEA folks involved at all, they would be very interested in having that data as well. The third data collection method is permanent product. A permanent product is something you can hold and see as a result of behavior. Permanent products include information that can be found in a student's file. They can include office referrals, suspension reports, attendance reports, and even bus incident reports. Pros to a permanent product data collection method include providing documentation regarding more intense behaviors. For behaviors that warrant an office referral or a bus incident report, it does give you an idea of how often or how frequent that level of behavior is occurring. Another pro is it does not require ongoing data collection. It is a one-time method of collecting data. You get the student's file, you look through it, you see what permanent product records are in there, and you make note of that. As I've said, it's best for looking at intensity or frequency units of measurement. How many times has a student been suspended? How many bus incident reports were written? And so forth. Permanent products may be difficult to find. They may not always provide a good picture of the behavior of concern, and the behavior of concern may not be well defined. Here's an example of a permanent product, and this is a bus conduct report. So you can see it's a form that is found in a student's file, and this would be an example of a permanent product. The next data collection method includes anecdotal notes. I would imagine many of you are very familiar with anecdotal notes. An anecdote can be a note of an event during the student's day. It can be very short or very detailed. And oftentimes they are shared with the parents either in a homeschool notebook or via email. Anecdotal notes should use clear, specific, and objective language. There are pros to using anecdotal notes. It's a great way of communicating information with parents. Another pro is it requires only paper, pencil, or maybe just an email address to send the notes to a parent. This anecdotal notes can also be used to see patterns of behavior. Anecdotal notes can become permanent products. So you can, or someone can look through the anecdotal notes and figure out whether or not there's a pattern of behavior that is occurring. Some of the cons to anecdotal notes include timeliness. You all know how busy you are during the school day. It can be difficult to write notes and to keep track of everything that goes on during the day. Additionally, it may be difficult to remember details unless written right after an event. And to be honest, that then falls into the timeliness because oftentimes you don't have time to write notes as the day occurs. Anecdotal notes are best when used when looking at the topography unit of measurement. So when you want to get an idea of what the behavior looks like in general, anecdotal notes can provide a good way of collecting that data. So here's an example of an anecdotal note. This was part of a homeschool notebook that was used for a school team a number of years ago. And you can see that there were some concerns that they just always addressed in the anecdotal notes. So they talked about how the eating at school was, how the behavior in the morning and the behavior in the afternoon were. And for this particular student who had some digestive medical concerns as well, they always wanted to keep track of whether or not this student had a bowel movement at school. Then there is a place for comments and notes. So this is a really good example of an anecdotal note. that was a part of a homeschool notebook for a student. Now let's move on to interval recording as another data collection method. Interval recording is a more structured format for collecting data. It is an observation of the student, and the observation is divided into equal time increments. Oftentimes, we look at 10-second intervals. The observer records whether or not a behavior occurs during each interval. There are 3 different types of interval recording. The first is whole interval. This would be that the behavior is recorded when it occurs for the entire interval. So for example, it would have to occur for the entire 10 seconds of that interval. A good example of this would be if you are recording how often a student is up out of their seat. So if you are doing whole interval recording for a student who is out of their seat, they would have to be up wandering around the classroom for the entire 10 seconds of that interval in order to be counted. Partial interval is the behavior is recorded even if it occurs for only part of the interval. So for example, if you are observing a student to identify how many times they blurt out, partial interval may be a good way to look at that. So a student may blurt out for 2 or 3 seconds of a 10-second interval. If you are using partial interval recording, you would count that blurting out even if it only occurred for part of the interval, because if you are using partial interval. And time sampling is where the behavior is recorded only if it occurs at the end of the interval. So for example, during a 10-second interval, if the student blurted out at the beginning for just a couple of seconds, and at seconds 8, 9, and 10 they were quiet, you wouldn't record it if you were using time sampling. Interval recording has some pros and cons. The pros, it provides an estimate of how often or how long behavior occurs. It can also be useful when behavior is difficult to count. And we look at using interval recording when we're trying to determine or measure frequency or duration. There are some pretty big cons to interval recording. The first being it really requires undivided attention and a high level of focus in order to collect data in this way. You have to do a lot of planning to go in to do this type of data collection. Additional forms and tools are required, including a stopwatch. Behavior may be underreported or overreported depending on if you choose to use whole interval, partial interval, or time sampling. And another con is it really does take some practice to become comfortable with interval recording. You can't just walk in and start recording, collecting data with interval recording. It takes some practice. Here's an example of what interval recording might look like. Oftentimes we report it in a chart format like this, where, as you can see, data were collected on student behavior at 10-second intervals using the key at the bottom. So if there's a plus in the box, it means the behavior was appropriate for that 10 seconds. If there's an M in the box, it means the student was off task with their motor behavior, which basically means they might be fidgeting or up out of their seat, something to do with their body moving. V indicates that the student was off task verbally. That could be talking to a peer next to them or asking questions that of the teacher that aren't appropriate to what the class is doing at the time. And if you see a P in the chart, that indicates that the student is off task passively. These examples of that would be a student who might be daydreaming or looking out the window. They're not disruptive to others, but they're clearly not engaged in the class activity as well. And as you can see from this example, a clear operational definition of the behavior must exist. Next, we have duration recording. Duration recording is used when the concern is how long the behavior lasts. Duration recording can be used when behaviors are hard to count. So whether a student is having a tantrum, or they are sleeping, or they are being non-compliant, those things that maybe don't have a specific start and end time that can easily be counted, duration recording is a good way to collect data. The pros of duration recording include it can provide information regarding how long a behavior lasts. If a student is sleeping a lot during the school day, you can keep track of how long they're sleeping, and that can provide very useful information to the team. You can also use peer comparison when you are using duration recording. So if you're concerned that it takes a student forever to use the bathroom, let's say 15 minutes, you can also keep track of how long it takes a typical peer to use the bathroom, and then you can compare those two sources of data. And similar to latency recording, when best used for latency measurement, duration recording is best used when you are looking at using duration as a unit of measurement. Cons to duration recording include it can be difficult to determine the exact start and stop time of the behavior. They may be close to falling asleep, but when are they exactly falling asleep, or when are they exactly awake may be difficult to determine, but this can give you a ballpark idea. And another con, not all behaviors can or should be counted in this way. Here's an example again of a chart that gives you some examples of duration recording. So your left-hand column is the behavior that you are keeping time on. The second column is the start time. So for example, the student's temper tantrum started around 10:30. The end time is when you as the observer determine that that behavior is now over. And then the last column just gives you the duration. The last data collection method that we will discuss today is ABC recording. ABC recording also stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. In video 1, we talked a little bit about ABC in using it as a way and a method to determine the function of behavior. This is very similar, but this gives you the tools to record behavior in this manner. We can also think of ABC recording as before, during, and after a behavior occurs. Data collecting in this way includes observations. You conduct observations to look at what happens before and after the behavior of concern. And this is best used for topography unit of measurement. Pros to ABC recording, it provides valuable information about the environment in which the behavior occurs. So what is immediately leading up, occurring before the behavior? What is immediately occurring after the behavior? So it gives you a broader sense of what is going on. ABC recording also helps determine what can be changed in the environment, either before or after behavior, to make the behavior better. A few cons to ABC recording. 1, it requires additional analysis and thinking about why behavior is occurring. And similar to other ways of measurement, it can be difficult and time-consuming to conduct. And sometimes you need a lot of practice to feel comfortable with doing ABC recording. Here's an example of an ABC recording chart or template that you might use. You have different behaviors that you can look to observe and identify those as behavior 1, behavior 2, or behavior 3. And then you have a chart where you can write what happened to trigger the behavior for the antecedent, and then what consequence immediately followed after the behavior occurred. Here's another example of an ABC recording. This gives you more prompts for the different ABC components. So you have your date and time, but you can also then check what happened before, what the behavior looked like, as well as the consequence of the behavior. If you were to start doing some ABC observations, I would recommend using a checklist similar to this to start with until you become more comfortable with observing behavior in this manner. To end this competency, there are a couple of journal activities that we have designed. This journal activity is to determine which data recording method to use. So what I would like you to do is using the data recording methods listed below, and these are the ones we just reviewed, determine which method is best to collect data for each of the behaviors of concern listed on the next slide. Provide a brief explanation for your choice. So as you can see, the 7 different data recording methods are listed here. And here are the journal, the different examples. So for these 5, I'd like you to determine which data recording method is best and why. These can be completed in your journal activity form that is included as a handout. And lastly, I would like you to conduct a student observation. For this journal activity, choose a student with whom you work and conduct a 5-minute observation using one of the data recording methods. Answer the following questions after your observation. If you need tools to help you record data during your 5-minute observation, you can find examples of the frequency chart, the ABC recording forms, as well as a couple of other forms as a part of the accompanying handouts that go along with this video. That concludes Competency 3 information for this video series. Next, I will turn it over to Dee, who will be discussing Standard 4, Competency 4. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Deanne Blanchard. Now we will be moving on to Competency 4 of Standard 4. As a reminder, Standard 4 deals with supporting the emotional and behavioral health of the students with which you work. Competency 4 states the paraeducator will assist in modifying the learning environment to manage behavior and social skills. The learning objectives for this competency are to learn how the environment impacts behavior, to learn methods and techniques for a proactive, preventative approach, and to learn when and how to respond to student behaviors. As a review, the following slides describe some of the behavioral principles upon which the approaches in this section of the video are based. Behavior is learned and serves a specific purpose. This is good news because it means that we can change behavior by teaching the correct or expected behavior. Acceptable or expected behavior can change depending upon the setting. For instance, yelling "roll, state," standing and pointing to the right is very appropriate and even encouraged after the Cyclones get a first down in a football game. However, that same behavior at a wedding when asked to speak now or forever hold your peace would not be expected or appropriate. We need to be clear about the behavior we expect across the many settings within the school. Research tells us that we can improve behavior by 80% just by pointing out what a person is doing correctly. Yet we use this strategy less than 10% of the time. It is one of the most effective strategies for increasing positive behavior. Behavior that is recognized and supported is the behavior that will increase. Educators cannot make students learn or behave, but we can create environments that increase the likelihood students learn and behave. We can change our own behavior in order to influence the behavior of our students. Two of the predominant themes for impacting behavior are prevention and teaching. Prevention is the most efficient approach to improving behavior. If a problem behavior does not even occur, you have been very efficient in dealing with it. Teaching is the most powerful approach to supporting expected behavior. We don't assume students know how we want them to behave, we teach them. In the last video, we discussed circumstances or events that influence or impact behavior positively or negatively. We can purposefully and proactively modify the setting events, the antecedents, and the consequences that surround behavior in order to prevent problem behavior and improve outcomes. We will be discussing several of these proactive, preventative approaches in the following slides. Fostering a positive relationship with students is the most important approach for encouraging expected behavior. Students are more likely to meet expectations if they know we respect them and like them, and if they respect and like us. Get to know your students. When adults take advantage of opportunities to speak with their students about life outside school, it's an indication to students that they actually care about them as a person. They don't care how much we know until they know how much we care. This video talks about ways to make positive connections with students.
Good evidence. So even if I said, I don't know, I think she was more of the damsel in distress, you could say, no, Miss Ballou, here's my evidence for why. So I think you should put that up there. I can definitely understand that.
When teachers cultivate positive connections with their students, they create an environment where students can trust and learn.
Relationships are the most important thing, I believe, as far as the student-teacher responsibility goes. I start as soon as I can. Day one, I start to get to know them. I start to get to know their little quirks and their little habits and their temperaments. And I focus on how I can communicate with them. Raise your hand, not your voice. Who can tell me what a volley is? Think back to volleyball, think back to ping pong. If I can develop a relationship with that student, I have a better chance of that student responding to what I need when I ask them to do it, especially in difficult times. When they don't feel like they're having the greatest day or they don't feel like staying on task, I can take them aside and with the relationship I built, have a small conversation with them and get them on task much quicker.
Julie's walking silently. I would say that first and foremost, building a relationship with students and building a relationship with families. Because the student needs to be intrinsically motivated to behave. And part of what can intrinsically motivate a student to behave is your relationship with that student.
By creating positive connections with students, teachers can model appropriate social behaviors.
My students know I respect them. I use the word please a lot. I use the word thank you. I don't allow anyone to say the word shut up in my class. So they've noticed that I'm going to respect them, and in return, I get that respect myself.
Can we go like girls on one side and boys on one side?
I don't have a problem with that.
I have little frog notes that I write specific little details of maybe what a student did in class. You were a rock star today, great participation in class. And I've even seen kids at the end of the year still have those taped inside their locker because they mean a lot.
Good. You got it, Dariana.
It takes constant little tiny conversations here and there at recess, in the morning, at the end of the day, phone calls to the parents. Soon enough, kids will figure it out, and your most challenging students will start to follow your expectations.
Clearly defining expected behavior creates predictable, consistent environments and helps to prevent behavioral errors. Expectations are the broad concepts that describe the behavior that you determine are important for success school-wide. Rules are the specific criteria for achieving those expectations. What we identify as rules describe the expected behavior for each setting in objective terms. As a reminder from Video 1, classroom rules should be written using the AMPWA guidelines in order to increase their effectiveness. Rules need to be written in observable terms. Observable means I can see it. Rules also need to be written in measurable terms, meaning I can count it. Just as we do with school-wide expectations, rules should be positively stated. Positively stated rules encourage the desired behavior and tell students what we want them to do. Fourth, rules need to be stated so students clearly understand what is meant. The last guideline for writing rules is always applicable. They need to be able to be consistently enforced. Here are some examples of classroom rules using the AMPWA guidelines. After the classroom rules have been defined, it is helpful to post them in the classroom in a prominent spot. Having the rules posted will remind students of the rules and can prompt you to refer to them regularly and frequently. These are the rules for this PE class. Of course, posting the rules is not enough. We need to teach classroom rules to ensure students know what we expect and will comply with them. Direct instruction is an effective approach to teach expected behavior. Tell the student exactly what the rule is, what and how you want them to do something. Show them through modeling and demonstration. Have them practice with guidance and then independently. Give them feedback, both positive acknowledgement and corrective feedback. Using examples and non-examples provide additional clarity for what the expected behavior looks like and sounds like. The following slides illustrate this point. OSH is the concept you will be learning today. So, what is OSH? This is OSH. This is also OSH. And this is OSH. Okay, now you try it. Is this Osh? Yes, this is Osh. How about this one? Is this Osh? Yes, this is Osh. So do you know what Osh is? Probably many of you are not sure. So let's try this again. Here are some more examples. This is Osh. Here is Osh. This is also Osh. And this is not Osh. Okay, now you try it again. Is this Osh? Yes, this is Osh. How about this one? This is not Osh. And this one? Yes, this is Osh. So do you know what Osh is now? Most of you probably do. Osh are the red-sided triangles. Good job. You can see that giving some examples as well as some non-examples clarify the concept further and lead to mastery more quickly. Another important step in teaching is acknowledging students when they comply with the rules. Giving positive feedback that is specific will help increase the likelihood students will comply with the rules in the future. An example of positive feedback is, "Jack, thanks for getting your book out and getting started right away." Here's what we know from research about positive reinforcement. Behaviors that are supported and recognized are the ones that will increase. If the behavior increases, it has been reinforced. Classrooms that demonstrate a high level of praise indicate a high level of time on task. Of course, the converse is also true. The quickest way to change behavior is to point out what someone is doing right. You can improve behavior by 80% just by doing this. And actual rates of teacher praise are very low despite the effectiveness of the procedure. You should strive for 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negatives, 5 positive interactions to every 1 correction. Take a look at this picture. What do you notice or see? Do you see the baby? Did you see it before? It is interesting how once you see the baby, you can never not see it. You tend to see what you are looking for, so you will see the behavior that you are looking for. Look for what students are doing correctly and point that out. Often we tell students our rules at the beginning of the school year, then expect students to follow them throughout the year. It is best to refer to them regularly and reteach as needed. It might be helpful to reteach expectations and rules after a holiday break or when you notice specific behavior problems. One way you can reteach is by providing a pre-correct. A pre-correct is a reminder of the rules to follow right before students are expected to use them in an upcoming activity. An example of a pre-correct for the rule, "Raise your hand to contribute," might be, "Students, as we begin the review for the test, please remember to raise your hand and wait to be called on if you have an answer or a question." Here is an example of a teacher using pre-correct prior to a transition. You can use a similar strategy individually with students.
It looks like it's about time for lunch. I want to remind you of our expectations in the hallway. You need to walk to the lunchroom quietly. Go ahead and put your things away, and you can head to the lunchroom. Michael, can you put your notebook away and get out your board? Just want to remind you, expectations in the hallway are to walk quietly. Can you point to the one walking quietly? Great job. Go ahead and go to the lunchroom.
Using schedules for daily activities or routines is a proactive approach that can help prevent problem behavior. They provide predictability and structure, especially for students who are disorganized or have difficulty staying on task. Use this link to learn more about individual and visual schedules and to complete the journal activity that is described on the following slide. The link to the website is also available under the accompanying resources on the page where you accessed this video. So for your first journal activity, refer to the schedules page from PBIS World using the link on the previous slide. Read the why, when, and how information. Then think of a student with which you work that could benefit from an individual or a visual schedule. Then find 2 resources from the Resources and Support section of the website and describe how each could be used with that student to prevent or reduce problem behaviors. Pause the video now to complete this journal activity. Transitions can be magnets for disruptive behavior because of the unstructured nature of them. Teaching a behavior for transitioning from one activity to another and prompting students about what's to come are proactive strategies that can help transitions go more smoothly. This video illustrates ways to achieve effective transitions.
Don't get out of your seat. You're cleaning while sitting. Transitioning from one activity to another is very important because it will keep you from losing instructional time.
Establishing clear procedures is an important component of a holistic classroom management framework.
Rotate back to your original seats when I say rotate.
Clear transition procedures contribute to a focused, organized classroom environment in which instructional time is maximized.
There's a chair right next to you. Yep.
Effective transitions involve simple, clear steps, often signaled by visual or auditory cues. It is best to establish them early in the school year, but even more important, to apply them consistently each day.
It's all about a step-by-step process, making sure you stop them in increments. You don't try to give it to them all at once. They need bite-sized pieces, and you need to make sure that they understand completely. I didn't even have to say, you remember what step 1 means? Step 1 is where you stand up and you're quiet and push your chair under. Step 2 is where your hands are in your pocket and you line up behind your table leader. And then step 3 is to go in whatever direction that you need to go to get to the next location. It needs to be an expectation that's taught probably the first or second day of school. Step 1.
The key to transitions is practice, practice, practice. When you're in line, you have a nice straight line with your eyes forward. It's a time where a lot of your great lesson can become derailed, and you can either set them up for success or set them up for failure.
When we move, we're going to move silently. I love for transitions to be natural. I know that my David Mortimer Baxter group knows exactly what to do when they get there. I think any time you can get the kids to flow somewhere naturally, it's going to go smoother and more efficiently.
Ooh, I love how it's so quiet in here. My goodness, we can get so much learning done, and everybody is just so focused.
Here is a list of some other considerations for taking a proactive approach to preventing problem behaviors or keeping the problem small by intervening immediately. A student may have some sensory or other special needs that you could plan for. For instance, maybe a student gets agitated with too much light or noise. Planning for having them work in a darker, quieter part of the room may prevent problems from occurring. Just being visible or nearby can prevent problem behavior. What do you do when you are driving and you see a policeman? You maybe take your foot off the pedal or check your speedometer. Even if you aren't speeding, you check your behavior. That is what adult visibility and proximity does. It helps kids check their behavior. Thinking ahead of time about some of the times and or circumstances when problem behavior occurs can help you make some changes to prevent the problem from occurring. One strategy might be to teach a student a visual or nonverbal cue that either you will use when you need to prompt them about their behavior, or one they can use if they need your help or are feeling out of control. The following video gives some examples of verbal and nonverbal cues to help redirect behavior without disrupting instruction.
Okay, that's a really great question. That's not on task. We're gonna take me a test on Monday, okay? You need to show me your work using a rectangle.
Intervention and redirection are important components of a holistic classroom management framework. Sometimes students get off task, and it is up to the teacher to redirect that behavior.
Show me grit, I'll show you grit. You got it? Go.
Corrective strategies such as verbal cues, nonverbal cues, and proximity control are respectful, non-confrontational, and allow students to maintain their dignity.
Box Turtle was sitting by the path eating grass when Wolf came along. Jordan. What are you doing? Wolf asked.
A verbal cue can be as simple as saying the name of the student whose attention has wandered from the task at hand.
So I think that they all
Maurice.
were. So I think they were all laying in the grass for all of the hills, and then
Maurice.
once the fox came down.
Verbal redirection should never demean the student or cause the student embarrassment.
JT, it's a warning. I need you started your do now by now.
And I think that silent cues are very important as well. You can just keep going and make a quick cue, and they know exactly how to fix the behavior so that they can continue learning. Okay, this one is, I need your eyes. And so I'm teaching, and quickly I catch eyes with you, and I keep going. That one, sit down. If you're not sitting properly, then I'm still teaching, and my hand is just asking you to sit and keep it, I keep it moving. I'm coming, Duran, sit up, please.
By increasing proximity to a student, a teacher can send a subtle message that redirects a student's behavior.
They need to feel loved and they need to feel wanted in the room. And when they do, they really do turn out the best work.
On fire, very good.
For your next journal activity, consider the proactive strategies that are listed under Other Considerations back on slide 81. Think about a specific behavior that is a problem for a student or students with which you work. Then, in your journal, name the behavior that you chose and determine a strategy or change that you could implement to help prevent or reduce that behavior. Please be specific. Pause the video now to complete this journal activity. Staying calm and in control when a student's behavior becomes a problem can be a challenge. However, we can only control our own behavior. So when a situation has the potential to escalate, it's important to model behavior that you want your student to follow. The objective here is to prevent escalation. Here are some things you can do to help yourself stay in control. Appear calm and confident. Don't let the student see your anxiety. Use a calm tone and even cadence in your voice and speech. Don't be defensive or take things personally. And always be respectful and treat the student with dignity. If you don't escalate, there's a greater chance that the student will not escalate. The best way to keep a situation from escalating into a real problem is to recognize the signs of anxiety or agitation early on in a student. How you respond to these early signs can either escalate or de-escalate the situation. The following video from the Crisis Prevention Institute, CPI, offers some excellent strategies for keeping anxiety from escalating to more challenging behavior.
The following excerpt is from CPI's Preventive Techniques 2 DVD, featuring strategies and content from CPI's Nonviolent Crisis Intervention Training. This clip is intended to help staff recognize anxiety in clients, patients, or students and respond appropriately to it. Anxiety is demonstrated by a change in a person's behavior. Think for a moment about the people you work with. How do you know when they're anxious? Your responses might have included fidgeting, pacing, rocking, or hand-wringing. Some people withdraw. Others become very talkative. The better you know the people in your care, the more easily you'll be able to identify the way that they behave when they are anxious. Anxiety calls for a supportive response. In order to provide a more supportive staff response, it's helpful to know the person's typical behavior and to know what's important to the individual. Let's see how that might look.
This is just the worst thing that could have happened. I can't believe it. What did I do to deserve this? I'm such an idiot.
I can hardly keep up with what you're saying, Chloe. Something must really be bothering you. Want to talk about it?
Stella always helps me. She's one of the few staff here who understands my issues. Some of the other staff just don't listen. All they want to do is boss me around. I know, they're in charge. I wish they had more Stellas here.
Hey, Anthony, want to give me a hand here? I could use the help. Come on. Sometimes I can distract Anthony. When I take the time to really get to know the client, then I can figure out what's really bothering them. Anthony's not a bad guy. He's just had some tough breaks.
I'm sorry we're taking so long today. We had an emergency earlier. It shouldn't be much longer.
I guess I can wait a little longer. We usually have to wait in this place. I'll give them another 10 minutes. If I'm not called in by then, they're really gonna get a piece of my mind.
Oh my God! What am I going to do? What am I going to do?
I know it's been a rough day, Chloe. I'm here to help in any way I can. I know I can't do that with all clients, but Chloe usually responds well when I give her a supportive touch on the arm.
As you can see from these examples, there are many different ways of being supportive, but there is one common component in many of them, and that is that staff members are keenly aware of their own nonverbal behavior. First, let's take a look at personal space, also referred to as proxemics. Most of us feel uncomfortable when somebody gets too close, but the amount of personal space we need varies from person to person and situation to situation. What's true for almost everyone is that coming too close tends to increase a person's level of anxiety. It might even be perceived as a threat. Respecting an individual's need for personal space might make the difference between a person listening to you or moving into that second defensive behavior level. Maybe you noticed that in one example, the staff person touched the agitated individual. Sometimes appropriate touch can have a calming, comforting effect, but it's a supportive response that should be limited to situations in which you have a strong rapport with the agitated person and are confident that your touch will be received in a positive way. Notice, too, that sometimes you don't need to say anything. Silence can be a good thing. You just need to take time to listen, without comment and without passing judgment. Think about your own experiences. What supportive responses work best with those in your charge?
Let's take another look at the staff members who showed us their supportive responses. You'll notice that in addition to allowing space of about one leg length if standing, these staff members avoided a toe-to-toe challenging position. Instead, they stood off to the side. This position is called a supportive stance. A supportive stance reduces the chances that you'll be seen as a threat and also allows you a margin of safety if the other person becomes physically aggressive. Notice that even the staff member who touched her client on the arm approached from the side and avoided quick movements that could be seen as threatening. There's another form of nonverbal behavior that's also important throughout all the crisis development levels. Most of us call it body language, but the more technical term is kinesics. Kinesics includes posture, movement, gestures, and facial expressions. It's important to be aware of your own body language and try not to do things that may appear threatening, such as putting your hands on your hips, rolling your eyes, or shaking your finger. Facial expressions can also communicate anger, disgust, or other emotions that can raise anxiety levels.
De-escalation techniques are counterintuitive. A natural reaction is to go into freeze, flight, or fight. Having a plan and practicing the techniques will help you stay calm and prevent students from escalating their behavior. For your next journal activity, read the article CPI's Top 10 De-escalation Tips. You can download the article from the accompanying resources list on the website where you accessed this video. Think about which strategies in the article you do well and those that you could improve. Choose one of the strategies that you would like to improve. Then consciously implement the strategy with a student who is displaying anxiety or agitation. Write a paragraph in your journal describing the strategy you implemented and how it worked with the student. Pause the video now to read the article. Here is a summary of the required journal activities for Competency 4. Here is contact information for Ann and me. Feel free to contact us with any questions you may have regarding the content of this video. For questions regarding assignments and/or credit, please contact Sarah Schiller or Glenda Succo. Thank you for joining us today.